Chapter 1. Mornings beneath thatched roofs before the sun crests the hilltops. Life in the Iron Age settlement is already moving, not quickly, not in haste, but in rhythm. The rhythm of footsteps across packed earth. The creak of woven reed doors pulled open. A quiet murmur of breath in the cold. A woman reaches for a cloak beside her sleeping mat. It is damp with morning dew, pulled in through the roof's thatching. She wraps it around her shoulders and steps outside, where a faint curl of smoke from the neighboring longhouse marks the first rekindled fire of the day. Her feet find their way across flattened pathways, worn by generations of souls. Her house sits in a ring with others, encircling the shared hearth zone. Chickens mutter quietly in reed baskets nearby. Children stir slowly inside. The older ones have jobs to do. Not chores, but roles woven into the fabric of each day. A boy pulls a dented iron pot from beneath a sleeping platform. A girl unwraps the fermented barley mash left buried in ash. They do not speak. They know what comes first. Water from the well, fire from the embers, mash into a pot. In this Iron Age community, mornings begin with fire, water, and movement. The thatched roof above does not stop the wind, but it slows it. The clay floor holds last night's warmth, and so, feet move across it with practiced grace, never stumbling on tools or baskets. In the corner, a grandmother grinds grain on a worn stone. Her wrists move in quiet rhythm. She does not hurry. Her thoughts track weather through the creaking of the beams above. Rain is likely. Not heavy, but enough to soak wool and churn pathways into mud. Someone must check the roof edges later. She'll remind them, if she remembers. Beyond the village circle, a man walks with a curved iron blade on his back. Not for war, for hay. His steps are deliberate, measured by the dew line. If he begins too early, the grass will not dry properly. He knows this. He learned it from his brother. His brother learned it from a man who died in last winter's fever. Time moves like that here. Not in years, but in memories, stacked like jars on a shelf. Inside one house, smoke begins to rise through the roof vent. The baby stirs. A woman places herbs on a flat stone to warm near the flame. She presses a cloth across a stone bowl, straining something bitter. She mutters to herself, not words but sounds. Familiar ones. This is morning language. This is morning language, the language of survival. Not far away, a boy slips away from the fire with a lump of bread in his sleeve. He means to share it later with a friend who was punished yesterday and missed supper. Kindness passes quietly here. It is not declared. It simply happens. And so the village breathes into its day. Not loudly, but deeply. In each breath, iron is not the loudest presence. It lies tucked into loops on belts, bound in plow teeth, hidden in fire hooks and knife edges. The iron does not shout. It supports. It remembers. The sun creeps over the low wall of woven thorn that marks the edge of the goat pen. A child yawns. Another ties a leather cord around a bundle of wood. Someone wipes ash from a cooking stone. A pair of neighbors argue quietly about who left the gate open. Nothing is urgent. Everything is important. This is how the day begins. With warmth, with memory, with the crackle of fire coaxed back to life and the breath of people who remember how to live by it. Chapter 2. Hands in clay and smoke in high-res, the morning settles into full light. The village begins its slow weaving of work and talk. Iron Age life is not quiet in the sense of silence. It is quiet like a forest is quiet, filled with small sounds, layered tasks, and movements that make sense to those who live them. By mid-morning, hands are already deep in earth. Near the edge of the village, 3 women kneel at a low pit where red clay has been gathered over generations. The earth is soft from yesterday's rain. They press their thumbs into it, kneading in bits of straw and ash to stop it from cracking when dried. No one gives instructions. The rhythm is in their fingers, passed down from the old ways. One of them is shaping a bowl, not large. It will sit beside the hearth to hold broth or salt. She turns it slowly in her hand, smoothing the sides with a flat stone, using spit to clean the edge. Another woman laughs softly when a boy pokes his head into the pit, hoping for a story. She obliges, not with the full tale, but with the beginning of one. That's enough to keep him still for now. Elsewhere, smoke has begun to rise from a low hut with a roof made of woven reeds and turf. It is the smoke of heat and curing, not cooking. Not cooking. Inside, two men work over iron tools and bone handles. They are fixing the curved hook of a plow, adjusting how it bites the earth. The older man squints at the metal, rubs it with a smear of oil, then tests its weight. There is no measure, only feel. Near the same hut, 3 children pull strips of hide through loops of twisted cord. They are softening leather, stretching it for boots or belts. Their hands are small, but strong from use. One child sings under his breath, a melody that dips and rises like the wind. It's a song he heard during the last gathering, though he doesn't know what the words mean. Still, they help the work go faster. By the central hearth, someone tends a simmering pot. Steam rises in slow spirals. The pot is lined with soot, its base repaired more than once. Inside it, a mix of barley and greens is breaking down into something edible. Something warming. The cook adds a pinch of salt and then a twist of bitter herb. He does not taste it. He knows from scent what it needs. A woman walks past with a bundle of herbs tied in a damp cloth. She's on her way to the drying racks where she'll separate the leaves from the stems and hang them above the smoke. She mutters to herself, ticking off what's left to do. Behind her, someone asks about the weather. She replies, not with forecast but with fact. The moss on the north wall is still wet. That's all they need to know. In another corner of the settlement, someone is shaping a spindle, carving the shaft smooth for wool. The sound of knife on wood is steady. A girl watches, then tries to copy. Her fingers slip, but the older woman beside her nods. She knows the first try is never clean. The second try will be better. Between houses, there is movement that isn't quite walking and isn't quite rest. It is the in-between of gathering and thinking. A child drops a pot and stares in horror until someone reassures her it's not broken. A dog barks at a crow. No one reacts. The crow flies off anyway. The wind changes by midday. You can smell the difference. It carries distant heather and the edge of salt, maybe from the sea. Someone notes it. Someone else adjusts the fish rack's cover. These are the little things that matter. They are not dramatic, but they shape the days. At the far end of the village, a group of older men and women sit near a low fire, wrapping cord around bone tools. They don't speak much. Their work is deliberate. One of them lifts her head now and then, watching the sky. She's not looking for birds. She is measuring light, cloud thickness, and the way her knees feel. These things tell her what the evening will bring. By now, smoke clings to everyone. Hair smells of ash and clay. Hands are stained with work. Children's faces are smudged with soot and flour. This is not untidiness. It is the pattern of a day well lived, a community breathing in sync with fire and earth and food. Soon the sun will begin to tilt, and the day will change again. But for now, the hum of work continues, quiet and full, under the thatched roofs and open sky. Chapter 3. Food without rush. Fire without fear. When the sun slips just past its highest arc, the rhythm of the settlement does not pause, but it shifts. The morning's urgent tasks give way to something slower, less pressing. The kind of work best done with full bellies and warm hands. Someone calls out, not a word, but a tone, and others echo it softly. It means that food is ready, or nearly. The call is not a command. It is more like a reminder. The pot has thickened. The bread is close to crisp. The stew no longer spits when stirred. A wide, flat stone near the main hearth becomes a place to gather. It is warm to sit on, smoother than the ground. Not everyone comes at once. Some bring their own spoons. Others share a carved ladle or a piece of bark hollowed into a bowl. A boy brings a stone with salt crust, wrapped in cloth. A girl sets down a slab of smoked fish with its skin still shining. Eating is not ceremonial, but it has its rhythm. People sit close, not in tight circles, but in overlapping ones. Elders sit low, knees bent, backs straight from habit. Children kneel or squat, Hands pass food, lift it, break it, dip it. No one speaks very much at first. The mouth is full, and the mind is busy with flavor. The stew today has barley and bitter root. Its taste is sharp, then soft. Someone adds crushed ash leaf. Someone else tears a bit of dried meat into it. When the pot is low, a splash of water thins the bottom. No one complains. Thin stew still holds warmth. At the edge of the fire, flat cakes bake on a hot stone. They're made with milled seed and water. Nothing more. A girl pokes them gently with a twig. She watches the bubbles rise in the dough and presses one down with the back of her hand. The heat makes her wince, but she does not move. The pain is mild. It's familiar. Nearby, another pot sits cooling. Inside is broth, rich and thick, dark from marrow and bark. It smells like winter and ash and iron. A small ladle rests on its rim, carved from antler. It's shaped like a scoop of a shell, and the handle is smooth from years of holding. One man drinks and sighs. It reminds him of when his son was born. Not because of the taste, but because that's when he first tasted it. After eating, some lie back with hands on bellies. Others stretch their legs and talk more freely. Talk drifts from who has seen the red fox to whether the river looks low. Someone hums. Someone else hums louder. A child laughs and mimics the tune, badly, which makes it better. And through all of it, the fire remains steady. Not roaring, but present. Its glow dances across faces. It crackles softly when fresh wood is added. A woman leans in to stir the coals. She pokes at ash with a thin stick, creating a small opening for heat to breathe. No one tells her what to do. She has done this for years. She can read the flame the way others read a face. Somewhere beyond the main hearth, a smaller fire smolders in a ring of blackened stones. It belongs to the toolmakers, or maybe the weavers today. Someone feeds it peat. Another person adds dry moss. The smoke that rises from it smells like warmth more than fuel. The fire is not just heat. It is a map of the day. People read its color, its breath, its smoke, the way the flame curls or doesn't, whether it leans or stands still. All of it means something. You do not speak to the fire, but you watch. And you listen. No one hurries in this part of the day. The rush of dawn has passed. The gathering of tools and water is done. Now comes the time between meal and evening, between labor and rest. A space where movement slows, but life still pulses quietly. A man sharpens a knife with a gentle rhythm. The stone is wet, and each stroke sings faintly, not for the sake of song, but because the stone is smooth and the blade is honest. A girl plaits cord beside him, eyes half closed. The cord loops and tightens between her fingers. It will become a sling or a strap or part of a shelter. She does not yet know. In the distance, someone claps their hands twice. A signal. 2 short sounds, not urgent. It means a goat is loose or a gate needs fixing. A boy stands, wipes hands on his tunic, and jogs off. No rush. Just time continuing. Later, when the sun begins to bend lower and the shadows stretch wide, the fire will change again. It will grow. It will gather around it more faces, more stories, more quiet watching. But for now, in the stillness after food, it holds everything in calm flicker. The heat is soft, the breath is easy, and the world is balanced. So rest a little here. The work is not done, but neither is the moment. Let the smoke trace soft lines into your hair. Let the taste of bitter root linger on your tongue. Let the fire hold you without asking anything in return. Chapter 4. Clothing that carries more than warmth and the quiet after food and the hush of midday fire. The camp's rhythm turns again. Not into stillness, but into something slow and hands-on. This is when the garments are touched, mended, reshaped, not just for warmth, but for meaning. In the Iron Age, clothes were not simply worn. They were remembered. At the edge of the clearing, near a low bench made from 2 stones and a smoothed plank, a woman lifts a folded cloak. It is not soft like wool from later ages. It is coarser, woven from twisted flax or goat hair, thickened by use. She shakes it out, and dust curls in the air like smoke. Children watch. One boy leans in and touches the edge, asking about a hole near the hem. She says nothing at first, then answers, That one was made by a thorn bush near the marsh. He nods, though he was not born when it happened. Another sits with a strip of hide and a bone needle. The thread is sinew, pulled from the leg of a deer many seasons ago, dried and split. She licks it once before feeding it through. Her hands work without looking. Each stitch closes a split in a leather shoe. The shoe's surface is layered with memories. Faint soot stains, a scar from a hot coal, a worn patch where toes press too often. She doesn't replace the shoe. She shapes it back into form. Nearby, on a flat stone, someone scrapes old hide. It's not for a new tunic yet, but it will be. The scraping is steady, rhythmic. The smell of it is strong. Hide in smoke and earth. Bits of dry skin fall like powder. This part of life is never silent. It's filled with soft sounds. The rub of stone, the whisper of thread, the creak of leather. Some cloaks are decorated. Not much, but enough. A line of red dye. A carved button from antler. A strip of woven braid that marks a clan or a marriage. These things don't scream, they suggest. And others read them like signs. A girl wearing a dark fringe at her shoulder might be mourning. A man with 4 knots on his belt might have crossed mountains. A child with a patterned sash might be learning the craft of weaving, still only permitted to wear 2 colors. Clothing is shared too. A wool tunic passes between cousins. A heavy cloak gets worn by whoever guards the goat pen at night. Some garments carry fire stains or healing herbs stitched into a hidden pocket. Not decoration, but memory. A linen wrap, stiff with dried resin, reminds its owner of a broken arm from a past winter. Still worn. Still useful. Still part of the body's past. On cool days, some smear ochre into cloth. Not as paint, but as signal, a stripe down the arm, a smear over the chest. Sometimes it's just tradition. Sometimes it means something more. One girl paints both knees before traveling across rivers. She says it keeps her warm. No one argues. There is laughter too. One boy wears a patched cloak so thick with mending that someone jokes it weighs more than a cow. He shrugs and says it's warm, and no one can argue. A younger child runs with a tunic far too long, tripping every 3rd step but refusing help. Someone eventually ties it at the waist, and the child grins as if the knot were magic. Garments are never just worn. They are handed down stitched up, folded small in memory. They whisper of times when someone sat by the fire with a broken shoe and made it whole again. They remind people of cold days survived and warm hands that mended them. Sometimes at night, before sleep, someone folds their cloak very slowly. They pat it smooth and set it near the hearth, not because it needs warmth, but because they do. And in this world, where few things last beyond the body's strength, a piece of clothing might outlive its maker. It might be burned later in ceremony or buried in a stone-lined grave. But before that, it lived many lives, soaked with sweat and river spray, dyed with berries, scorched by flame, tugged by children, and carried across many hills. So sit now and imagine the weight of a well-worn cloak across your shoulders. Feel the texture of hide where the fur still clings near the edge. Smell the faint trace of ash and salt. Close your eyes, and you might hear a quiet voice say, "That patch came from my sister's old tunic, and she made it from her mother's." Memory is not always written. Sometimes it's worn. Chapter 5. Meals measured in hands and time. Before the feast comes the gathering. Before the soup pot steams, before the fish sizzles on the flat stone, there is the slow rhythm of preparation. And in Iron Age life, food meant more than fuel. It was rhythm. It was community. It was memory shaped by hunger and fire. At dawn, the fire is coaxed back to life. Not lit from scratch, but revived. A coal hidden deep in last night's ashes glows when air touches it. A thin stick, a wisp of dried grass, and soon the hearth hums again. The smoke curls into rising light. It always begins like this. Someone kneels with a basket of grains. Emmer wheat, barley, millet, whatever the soil and season gave. Whatever the soil and season gave. The stones come out worn flat by decades of hands. 2 smooth stones grind the grain. back and forth, a low sound like rain on hide. Flour forms slowly, mixed with water, maybe a touch of salt or ground nettle if it's early spring. The dough is not shaped in loaves but flattened, warmed on heated rock until it stiffens and darkens. The scent is nutty, comforting, already old. Nearby, someone tends a pot. It is not iron, not yet. Clay or bronze, maybe. Inside, a broth simmers slowly. It contains marrow bones, wild onion, bits of dried meat, herbs pressed into bundles. The taste deepens with every hour it simmers. Some broths are kept going for days. Topped off, stirred, fed like fire. Fish are laid flat on green wood skewers and propped beside flames. Not too close. Turned slowly. Eyes white over. Flesh flaking. Children help here. Their hands are small enough to reach in without fear. They learn which wood smokes less, which turns black too fast. The fire teaches with heat and mistake. Berries are mashed with stones. Nuts cracked by hand. In late summer, honey is coaxed from combs gathered in hollow trees. In colder months, dried apple or plum is soaked in warm water until it softens. Not sweet like today, but sharp, familiar. A welcome taste of color when the land turns brown. Meals are never silent. There is talking, laughter, sometimes singing. A song about a goat who ate someone's shirt. A tale about the stew that burned so long ago it still lives in shame. Old jokes rise again with the steam. The bowls are not matched. Some are carved wood, some fired clay, some just hollowed bark. Everyone eats with hands. Food is torn, dipped, chewed. No one rushes. Even a small meal is shared. And sharing means more than politeness. It means trust. In lean times, food is more quiet. Roots scraped from frozen ground, bark ground into meal, thin soup with little more than memory in it, but still warm, still shared. Someone always gives a little more to the oldest, the youngest, the weakest. This is not charity. This is how the camp holds. Leftovers are rare. What's not eaten is fed to dogs, saved for later broth, or buried outside to keep animals away. Bones are cracked for marrow. Skin scraped and dried. Even the smell of cooking matters. Someone hangs near the fire to keep animals from creeping too close. And always there are the firekeepers. Not just cooks. These are the watchers. The ones who know which coal is ready, which log gives long flame, which smoke means wet wood. Their work is quiet, but everything depends on them. Sometimes food is celebration. A child's naming. A return from far travel. A harvest stored safely. Then the pot is bigger. The fire burns hotter. A goat might be roasted whole. A flat cake sweetened with berries passed from hand to hand. Music joins the meal. Someone taps a bone flute. Someone else hums low while stirring stew. The fire cracks in approval. When night falls, the last bites are eaten slowly. The pot scraped clean. The bread edge saved for morning. A few herbs burned near the coals, not for flavor, but for scent. It means the meal is done. Time to rest, time to dream. Tonight, you can feel the weight of that meal settle into your bones. Not heavy, not sharp, just warm, made by hand, shared by fire. A taste that lingers in the breath of memory. Chapter 6. Woven walls and weathered roof shelter in the Iron Age was not just a matter of keeping dry. It was a shape for life. It cradled stories. It held warmth and voices. It breathed with the seasons and shifted with the years. You did not simply sleep in a house. You listened to it. You moved with it. You knew where it creaked and where it sang. Most homes began with a circle or oval. That was the trusted shape. It fit wind and warmth. Posts were set first. Thick timbers if there was forest near, driftwood or scavenged trunks if not. These were sunk deep, packed with stone or clay. Then came the walls. Wattle was common, long branches bent and twisted into fences, then daubed with mud, dung, straw. When it dried, it held. Roofs dipped low and wide. Thatch from reeds or heather or rushes, layered in thick bundles, pinned with wood pegs or tied with cord. From the outside, a home looked like part of the earth, humped, weathered, patient. Weathered, patient. Smoke slipped from the top or from a small opening near the edge. Windows were rare. Instead, light came from fire, or cracks in the thatch, or doors left slightly ajar. Inside, the fire sat at the center. Always. It was not just for cooking, it was the heart. Around it, the world arranged itself. Beds along the walls, woven from reeds or layered with hides. Storage pots set in corners. Baskets hanging from pegs. Tallow lamps made from stone bowls or carved horn. The walls grew dark with smoke. You could read the age of a home by the soot line. One house might hold a whole family, parents, children, perhaps a grandparent, sometimes animals tucked in at night to share heat. Chickens in one corner, a goat tied just outside the door. The air was full of smell and sound, stew, smoke, wool, breath. At first it might seem crowded, but every sound had its place. Every person their corner. When a baby cried, the fire snapped in rhythm. The floor was often packed earth. In colder places, rushes were laid down, sometimes with ash underneath to soak moisture. When it rained hard, someone would press mud into new cracks. When wind rose, cords were checked. Thatch padded flat with sticks. Repair was never finished. It was a way of living. To tend the house was to care for everyone inside. Storage was everywhere. Under beds, behind bundles of wood, hidden pits dug in the floor, capped with stone. In summer, grain was sealed in sacks of hide and buried to stay cool. Tools leaned near the entrance. Bone needles, carved spindles, small knives wrapped in cloth. Things found use not by labels but by memory. The smooth stone near the hearth, the bent peg with the strong cord, the bowl with the scratch that held stew best. And always the rhythm. Morning brought fire coaxing. Midday brought doors open wide. Evening brought the closing in. Smoke curled to rafters. Someone added herbs to burn with meat fat. Children pulled hides close. Elders pressed hands to warm earth and told stories of houses before this one. Each roof beam had held another family. Each wall line followed older shapes. No home was truly new. Sometimes the house changed. A new wall added, a section open to air. If a person passed away, their sleeping place might be left bare for a season. A post near the fire carved with a mark. Not a grave, not a shrine, just a pause in the house's breath. Homes remembered in shape and silence. There were lean years too. Roofs that leaked, walls that crumbled, fires that burned too low. But still people stayed near. Even ruined, a house gave shelter. Even empty, it spoke of rhythm once held. And when a house was truly left behind, a new one would rise with the same curve, the same door facing morning light. Tonight, as you picture the thick thatch roof above, the flicker of light dancing on packed clay, know this: home was not a place of perfection. It was a place of care, built by hand, patched with story, held by breath and patience. And in that woven shelter, people rested under the oldest roof of all, the one made from warmth, from rhythm, from fire. Chapter 7. Meals without measure, cooking, sharing, waiting in the world of iron and smoke. A meal was never just a meal. It was warmth after rain. It was laughter pressed between hunger. It was a chance to be near, to pass something from hand to hand. The kitchen was not a room. It was a fire pit. A ring of stones, a patch of ash where broth had spilled and dried 100 times. Food did not arrive quickly. Nothing was fast. First came the gathering. Wild herbs pinched from edges of field, roots tugged from earth with cold hands, grains crushed slowly between stones until powder softened under fingertip. Bones split with care to scoop the marrow, that soft center of strength. All of this began in daylight and stretched into dusk. Cooking was a rhythm, not a recipe. No measures, no timers, just scent and sound. A pot might hang above flame or rest inside it, tilted just so on packed clay. The base was often grain, barley or emmer or whatever had lasted through winter. Into it went what could be spared, a sliver of dried meat, a splash of stored fat. If luck held, a few shreds of dried greens from last autumn. In wetter lands, clay ovens or hot stones were used. A hollowed pit filled with hot pebbles could slow cook meat or warm broth in skin pouches. The meat hissed when ready, not by instruction but by memory. A grandmother could tell it was time just by watching the steam. A child knew when to stir because the smell shifted from bitter to full. Fat was gold. It clung to the top of stews and was scraped into storage bowls. A thick lick of fat smeared on bread was a gift. Marrow too, pressed into pouches, mixed with herbs, rubbed into sore joints or burned gently for aroma. The fire itself carried taste. Smoke drifted into everything. One person's stew tasted of ash and thyme. Another's tasted like pine and silence. Eating was never alone. Even when food was scarce, it was shared. A single bowl passed around. The young ate first, or the oldest, or the one who had watched the sheep on the hill. No one counted bites. A piece of bread torn in half meant more than its size. Sharing was quiet. Sometimes a nod. Sometimes a hum. Sometimes just an open hand and the offer of steam. Children helped by fetching water or grinding grain, sitting on haunches beside the hearth, listening to the low sound of stirring. They learned by doing. How to test the heat of a stone, how to stretch a broth with more water and less grain, how to soften bark for tea or crush dried berries between thumb and stone. The end of a meal came slowly. Bowls scraped clean with fingers. Ash used to rub out oil. If a meal had gone well, there was silence at the end, not from fullness alone, but from the comfort of enough. People leaned back, looked at the fire, let their breath match the rhythm of wood crackle and flame flick. There were no tables, no chairs, no courses. But there was structure, a feast for returning hunters, a thin soup in lean months, a sweet root saved for a sick child. Sometimes a stranger might arrive. They would be offered something, always. Even if it was just a few warm sips, it was the law of fire. At night, someone might still be stirring a pot, long after others had slept. A mother feeding a restless baby. An elder making medicine tea. The scent of sage or bark or honey might drift into dreams. The last flame under the pot flickering low, telling its own story. So rest now near that imagined hearth. Picture the pot suspended on a beam. The faces lit by soft orange. The bowl passed hand to hand. A breath. A bite. A rhythm older than any recipe. A meal that meant survival and presence, not just taste. In the Iron Age, every dinner was a circle. And in that circle, people belonged. Chapter 8. Wool weaving in what people wore before dyes and labels, before hems and hooks. Clothing was touch and time. It was made by hand, worn by habit, and shaped by season. In the Iron Age, what someone wore said little about fashion, and everything about effort, climate, and clan. Clothes were protection, expression, sometimes even shelter, but mostly they were work. Wool was at the center of it all. Wool. Sheep roamed near settlements not only for meat but for fleece. Twice a year they were shorn with careful blades or plucked by hand. Their wool gathered in heavy clumps. The fleece was thick with oil and earth. Before spinning came washing. Women and older children stirred wool in warm water, often with ash or crushed roots to help release the lanolin and dirt. The scent was strong, wet sheep and hearth smoke. And the wool, once clean, was hung to dry on lines stretched between poles or draped over flat stones in sun. Spinning took time. Hours passed with a spindle whirring between fingers or bobbing from a thigh. The spinner pulled and twisted, fingers keeping rhythm without counting. Wool became thread, rough or fine, thick or thin, depending on who made it and what it was for. Coarser yarns made blankets or cloaks. Softer thread made underclothes or wraps for infants. Some thread was left its natural color, off-white, brown, gray. Some was dyed with crushed berries or bark or soot, pressed into paste and stirred in heated vats. Weaving followed, not always on large looms, Though some households had them, many wove on frames leaned against walls, or with backstrap looms tied to trees in warm months. The weaver sat or knelt, fingers dancing over the warp, and weft. It was slow. One garment might take weeks. Mistakes were part of the cloth. A slightly crooked line meant a restless child, a surprise rain, a bad night's sleep. These imperfections were not flaws. They were memory stitched in fiber. Children wore tunics or short wraps. Adults wore longer tunics, often belted. Cloaks were fastened with pins or brooches made from bone, bronze, or shaped stone. In cold regions, people wrapped in layers, wool over wool, sometimes lined with dried moss or feathers for warmth. In dry lands, light fabrics were worn loose to let air pass. Belts held pouches, tools, sometimes tokens or charms. Footwear was leather, tied around ankles with strips or cords. It softened with wear, shaped to foot, often patched with care. Head coverings varied. Some wore cloth wraps to block sun or keep in warmth. Others went bareheaded except in ritual. Hair was its own garment, braided, cut, tied, or let loose depending on role or mood. A long braid might mark a marriage. A cut fringe might signal grief. Ash was sometimes rubbed into hair for ceremony, or ochre to tint it for special events. Beauty was not separated from purpose. A strong belt was beautiful. A well-made cloak carried pride. Making clothes was a communal act. Grandmothers taught granddaughters how to twist flax into thread. Fathers showed sons how to soften leather. Neighbors borrowed tools or helped mend hems. A child might wear a tunic their sibling had once worn, or sleep under a wool blanket patched by 3 different hands. Clothing carried lineage. Stitch by stitch, it passed through lives, and there was always mending. A tear was not waste. It was invitation. A patch of different weave, a decorative stitch to hold the gap. On long evenings, while stews cooked and stories stirred, people sewed. They talked while fingers worked. Needle through wool, thread through time. Some added a flourish, a knot, a curl, a small shell stitched into a hem. By firelight, clothes took on extra life. The weave shimmered with flame. Shadows played across seams, a cloak draped over a sleeping form, a belt lying beside a carved tool. In these soft moments, fabric was more than function. It was comfort. It was presence. A reminder that even when the wind howled and the hills turned white, something had been made by hand, wrapped around a body, and warmed it through the long night. So rest now and imagine the wool in your hand. The spindles spin. The flick of thread passed from elder to child. The slow rise of cloth from fleece. In that steady work, there was patience. In every garment, care. In every patch, a story. In the Iron Age, what people wore wasn't bought. It was remembered. Chapter 9, Meal's Marrow and the Magic of Eating Together in the Iron Age. Eating was not just hunger met with meat. It was memory chewed slowly. It was warmth shared between voices. It was the day's rhythm condensed into pot and bowl and bite. People ate not only to survive, but to remember they were part of something. Each meal a thread woven into kinship and care. The hearth was the center, not just for warmth, but for cooking. Fires were rarely left to go cold unless a family moved. Coals were preserved in ash, and flame passed from household to household, if it ever died out. Around the hearth, meals simmered in clay pots hung on hooks, or nestled into stone circles. Flatbreads were baked on hot stones, grains soaked and stirred. Wild herbs added flavor, and meat, when they had it, was roasted, stewed, or wrapped in leaves to cook slowly over coals. Food was seasonal, always. There was no cold storage. People knew what the land offered and when. Spring brought fresh greens, soft roots, and sometimes young animals. Summer was generous. Berries, grains, honeycomb, fish from rivers. Autumn meant preserving, drying, smoking, storing in pits or baskets sealed with clay. Winter meals were leaner. Dried meats, marrow from bones split near the hearth, stews thickened with bark powder or ground nuts. What one ate often depended on how well the year had gone and how much could be carried from before. Eating was noisy in sound but quiet in mood. People sat close, Bowls were passed. Chunks were torn. Food touched hands, lips, stoneware, the edge of firelight. Children learned to chew carefully, not waste, not rush. Elders were served first or last, depending on tradition, but always with quiet respect. Conversation was low, stories told, plans made, jokes whispered, always carried by the warmth of meal. There were rituals even in simplicity. The first bite of a new harvest might be shared with the fire or with the earth. A drop of broth might be poured into soil or fire ashes as thanks. Bones were often placed with care after eating, collected in piles, buried or burned. Nothing was casual. Even leftovers had purpose. Boiled again, dried for later, fed to animals, or made into paste and rubbed into tools or hides. People knew the tastes of their world intimately. The sharp tang of early sorrel, the sweetness of roasted acorn mash, the richness of fat skimmed from boiling meat. Marrow was gold, cracked bones warmed by fire, the soft center scooped with care. It was food for growing children, for elders losing teeth, for anyone who needed strength. Even the steam from stew was precious, scented with wild herbs and bone. Some meals were private. A mother feeding a child beside the sleeping fire. A hunter sharing roasted roots with a companion in quiet forest. But others were loud, communal, full of shared bowl and overlapping fingers. Feasts were rare but deeply felt. They might follow a successful hunt, a birth, a wedding, or the return of someone thought lost. Then the fire burned hotter, the food richer, the laughter longer. Tools for eating were humble, wooden spoons, if any, flat stones for cutting, clay cups and bowls, each shaped by hand and never quite the same. People recognized their own bowls by feel. Some were marked with lines or patterns, some were passed down. A chipped bowl from an elder might hold more weight than a new one smooth from the kiln. And there was no table, just ground fire, maybe a hide to sit on. People ate near the heat, near the light, together. Dogs often joined. Chickens or goats lingered at the edge. Eating was not separate from life. It was part of its rhythm, woven into dawn and dusk and every embered hour in between. As night deepened, people leaned back, bellies warm, hands soot-streaked. Someone might hum. Someone else might scrape the pot clean. Children slept against adult legs. Stories began. Fire crackled, and so did memory. A single meal tied the day together. So let yourself rest now, as if you'd eaten hot stew near a flickering hearth. Imagine marrow on tongue, steam rising past your brow, someone beside you passing a bowl without a word. In that moment, you were fed, not just by food, but by company. That was the Iron Age table, not carved wood, but shared fire. Chapter 10. Spinning threads and weaving lives before looms clacked in stone houses or wool was counted in tally sticks. Thread was spun in quiet patience. In the Iron Age, clothing did not arrive with ease. It emerged from time, from twist, from fiber teased by hand and spun with care. It was not just warmth that clothing brought, but labor and story wrapped into every strand. Women, and sometimes men, spent long hours with spindles. The most common was the drop spindle, a simple stick with a rounded whorl near the bottom. A small tool, often made of clay or stone, that spun in air and turned tufts into line. Wool from sheep, flax from fields, sometimes nettle or bark fiber. Whatever the land gave, people used. Raw material became thread, and thread became cloth. The work was rhythmic and often quiet. Another turned the spindle. The thread gathered slowly around the shaft. Over time, hands learned tension by feel. If the pull was too fast, the thread snapped. Too slow, and the fibers bunched. It was a gentle balance, between twist and tug, between speed and pause. Spinning was everywhere, by the hearth, outside in the sun, walking to water, watching children, even during conversation or song. A spindle could be carried, paused, resumed. Some spinners tied it to belts, others balanced it on thigh. It became part of the body's rhythm. a second motion that never stopped. When enough thread was made, weaving began. At first, simple frames, upright wooden posts, horizontal branches, warp strings hung down like rain. The weft, the crossing threads, passed in and out, over, under, over again. Fingers guided the path. A bone or wooden comb tightened the threads. The cloth grew inch by inch. Dyes were rare but treasured. Plants gave color. Woad for blue, madder for red, nettle for green, bark for brown. Dyes were boiled in clay pots or fermented in pits. Some required weeks, others just heat. Cloth dipped, dried, dipped again. Color was never perfect, always a little uneven. But that unevenness was beauty, proof of hand and time. Clothes were simple. Tunics, wraps, belts, cloaks, few seams, sometimes decorated with stitch or shell. Child might wear a handed-down tunic frayed at the sleeve. An elder might have a finely woven belt passed from a mother. These were not throwaway garments. They were patched, mended, remembered. Even thread had meaning. Certain kinds marked tribe or season. A thick woolen wrap meant winter. A lighter flax weave meant summer task. Some communities placed dyed threads in the hair or tied them around wrists. They marked mourning or protection or celebration. A mother might wrap a newborn in thread blessed with ember smoke. A hunter might wear a red-stitched hem for luck. Spinning was teaching too. Children began early, first by watching, then by helping tease wool or turning the spindle. Under guidance, it taught patience, precision, the value of small work. It gave children something to own, a thread made by their hand, however wobbly, however thin. Spinners shared stories too. They told of cloth worn to weddings, to burials, to long walks across ridges. They remembered which fiber came from which sheep, and who dyed which scarf. The story of the garment lived in the cloth itself. Clothes did not just keep out wind, they carried memory. By night spun wool hung beside hearths. Weaving was stacked in baskets or draped near doorways. The scent of lanolin, smoke, and soil lingered in every garment. Hands rested, but the threadwork remained. A finished cloth folded carefully beside tools, a spindle set beside the sleeping fire, now rest as if beside a spinner. Hear the soft twist of fiber, the faint creak of loom frame, the breath of someone humming while hands work in light and shadow. This is not only clothing, it is care coiled into line. The Iron Age clothed its people not just in wool, but in memory, shared work, and gentle pride. Chapter 11. Markets, meals, and the slow trade of everyday goods beyond the fields and hearths, where wool spun into thread and iron glowed in the forge. Iron Age people gathered, not just for rituals or protection, but for the quieter rhythm of exchange. Markets did not look like rows of stalls or shops with coin and chatter. They looked like blankets spread on grass, like baskets placed near river bends, like quiet negotiations beneath trees while sheep grazed nearby. Trade in the Iron Age moved slowly. Some items traveled between neighbors. Others crossed hills or rivers. Salt, for instance, could move hundreds of miles, passed from hand to hand, always needed, never wasted. Flint, though old by Iron Age standards, still held value. A well-shaped flint blade might last longer than newer iron if kept dry. Grain was shared too, sometimes in sacks, sometimes as seed, sometimes as bread already baked and offered warm. Cattle were not just animals, they were currency. A strong cow meant wealth. A piglet could be exchanged for a woven tunic or a jar of smoked fish. People remembered who gave what. Debts were not numbers, they were stories. I gave you grain in the frost season. You gave my sister flax last thaw. These were quiet ledgers, kept not on tablets but in talk, in memory, in trust. Food often changed hands at such gatherings. A woman might offer fermented berries in exchange for dried fish. A boy might carry his family's extra eggs to swap for honeycomb. No shouting, no pressure, just careful words. Taste this, someone might say, offering a bite before the exchange. Sharing food was more than trade. It was respect, a way to show that the goods were real, fresh, worthy. Tools moved slowly across regions. A sickle, passed from forge to hand, found its way across valleys. A pot made with a certain clay, reddish and firm, might be recognized 2 hills away. People began to know styles. Those bowls come from the southern ridge, or this cord is twisted like the forest edge people do it. Style became a kind of signature. It told where something came from and who made it. It carried stories inside it. Markets were social too. A chance to hear news. A calf born with white hooves. A late frost up north. A traveler who sings in 2 tongues. These were passed in low voices, between bites of soft bread or honeyed mash. Children chased each other through legs while adults discussed rope, rain, and rabbits. Not every trade needed things. Some traded time. I'll help you build your fence if you dig my ditch, or skills. I can mend your cloak if you show me how to set a fish trap. These barters were built on presence, not possession. They needed trust and memory, and often a witness, a grandmother, an elder, a neighbor, someone to nod and say, yes, they promised. There were traveling traders too, men and women who walked for days with bags of salt or ribbon or beads. They knew paths and faces. They told stories between places. When they arrived in a village, people came not just for goods but for tales. What did the river people say? Had snow fallen on the high road? Did the ferry still cross the eastern bend? These traders were maps in motion. They carried not only pots and goatskin but knowledge. A whispered network of connection. Even songs were traded. A new rhythm might be exchanged for a fishing trick. A flute player might offer a tune in return for a fur. Children remembered melodies long after the trade was done, humming them near the fire as older hands tied bundles for next week's market. At night, after the goods were packed and the stories shared, people returned home with more than they brought. A jar of salt, a new blade, a song, a memory of a stranger's laugh. They walked back along worn trails, talking about the trades they made, the faces they saw, the odd objects they didn't quite understand. Did you see that spindle-weight? What was that herb she wore on her wrist? Curiosity walked with them. Now settle yourself as if beside a quiet market, the fire's just dying down. A basket near your hand, a warm cloth over your shoulder. You've eaten, traded, laughed. The night is still, and the wind carries scent of charcoal and sweet grain. You are part of a web, woven not of threads, but of shared need, slow travel, and memory exchanged in the language of trade. Chapter 12. Clothing the body. Marking the soul before fashion had labels, and long before wardrobes had hinges or locks. Iron Age people wrapped themselves in cloth, not just for warmth, but for memory, meaning, and belonging. What someone wore told a story, not just of wealth, but of task, season, family, and place. To see someone's cloak was to read their mourning. To note their brooch or dye was to glimpse their kin, or mood, or memory. Wool was everywhere. Sheep were part of daily life, and their wool, when spun and dyed, became the foundation of nearly every garment. But no 2 tunics were the same. Some were plain, thick, and weatherproof, meant for digging, herding, walking. Others were soft, edged with patterns or color. A sleeve might hold stripes for a family. A cloak's border might tell where someone last traded, or what plants grew near their home. Colors were not chosen lightly. They took work. Yellow from weld or marigold, red from madder roots, deep blue from woad, a plant that needed careful fermenting and stank of earth and mystery. Dyeing was half science, half ceremony. Women gathered plants, boiled roots, dipped threads into steaming vats and waited. Sometimes for hours, sometimes days. The resulting color was precious. It spoke of patience and fire, of boiling days and careful hands. Fasteners mattered too. A simple bone pin might hold a cloak in place, but a carved brooch, made of bronze or jet or amber, was a statement. Some were passed through generations. Others were given at birth or mourning or oath. A single piece of jewelry might have traveled farther than its wearer, passed along with tales of who wore it before and why. Leather played its role as well. Belts held more than trousers. They held knives, pouches, fire-starting flint. Shoes made of stitched hide were shaped to the foot and softened by oil or fat. Some were wrapped with cord, others fastened with toggles carved from horn. A child's first shoe might be plain, but an elder's shoe often showed patches, repairs, even decorations that whispered years of weather walked through. Tattoo and paint marked bodies too. Ochre mixed with fat made streaks across cheeks or arms. These were worn not only in ritual but sometimes for identification. A certain swirl near the wrist. A dot by the ear. These were quiet signs. A name written in pigment. Some wore paint for festivals, others in mourning. A red band might mean a loss. A black smudge might mean readiness to hunt or defend. Hair was another canvas. Braids wrapped with ribbon or beads. Shaved patches or knotted tufts. Some families had signature styles. A tightly coiled knot at the back. A pair of small feathers woven in near the crown. These details were learned, practiced, passed on. Children stood still while mothers shaped hair into symbols. Elders nodded approval, adjusted the curve of a combed line. Clothing also changed with season. Winter brought thick layering. Cloaks lined with fur or stuffed with dried grass. Summer allowed for lighter tunics, shorter wraps, bare feet in dew. Rain demanded oiled skins or moss-stuffed shoes. Everyone adjusted to the elements. Even babies were swaddled in felted wool or sheepskin bags, carried close for warmth, their heads covered with little caps tied under the chin. Adornment was never just display. It was memory. A torn hem might be kept rather than mended because it reminded someone of a storm. A charm sewn into a collar might protect against illness. A string of carved beads might count family names. A feather tied to a child's wrist might mark a first step or first word. The body became a scroll of lived days. And what they wore in death mattered too. Some were wrapped in their best cloak, pinned with a special brooch. Others were buried with the same garment they worked in, boots still muddy, fingers still curled around a pouch. Death was not costume. It was continuation. The same hands that spun wool for life wove it for rest. Now settle into your blanket, feel its weight. Imagine it dyed with plants your grandmother gathered. Imagine a pin at your shoulder that once belonged to a cousin, or a feather near your neck from a bird you saw last spring. You are clothed not just in fabric, but in story. Warmth shaped by hand, thread knotted with memory, style not for others, but for self, for signal, for love. Chapter 13. Eating the seasons. Sharing the fire before refrigerators or market shelves, before written recipes or kitchen walls. Food came with rhythm. It came with season and place, with memory and movement. In the Iron Age, to eat was to follow the earth's timing. To share food was to know trust. A good meal was more than warmth. It was understanding of rain, soil, and sun. Spring meant greens. After winter's roots and dried grain, people watched the thaw for signs. Nettles pushing through thawed soil, wild garlic curling from riverbanks, fresh shoots of sorrel and cress. These were boiled gently, eaten with stored grain or soft cheese. A green meal was a celebration, not for taste alone, but for the turning of time, a sign that hunger was loosening its grip. Summer brought berries, nuts, and plenty of work. Wild strawberries were picked early. Bilberries, raspberries, hazelnuts came later. Baskets were filled and dried or mashed into cakes. Grain ripened too. Barley and emmer swayed in fields, harvested with flint sickles, bound in tight sheaves. Bread ovens glowed, flatbreads baked on stone. And with the heat came meat, roasted over open fires. Scent of char and smoke drifted from hill to hill. Autumn was full. Apples, pears, crabapples boiled into stews. Roots like parsnip and turnip pulled from earth. Some meats were salted now, stored in pits or slung over hearth rafters. Fish smoked gently on low embers, sometimes coated in ash to preserve flavor. This was the season of gathering, sorting, salting, saving. Granaries filled, jars were sealed with beeswax. Camp smelled of sweetness and smoke, and winter, a season of planning. Food was not scarce if people had planned well. Stews thickened with grain, Bone broth simmered all day, dripping with marrow. Dried mushrooms, fermented cabbage, meat in fat. These filled clay bowls beside quiet fires. Meals were slower now, more silent. A spoonful was measured not by hunger, but by how many cold weeks remained. But meals were never lonely. Eating alone was rare. Even a midday snack was shared if hands were near. A child with a roasted hazelnut would crack it and offer half. An elder with stew might hold their spoon out, wordless. Sharing food was more than kindness. It was survival made ritual. A meal was proof that you were part of something. Tools mattered. Wooden spoons carved by firelight. Bowls shaped from birch or clay. Ladles with handles burned into curl. The act of making a vessel for eating was sacred. A good bowl was kept near, cleaned with moss or hot stones. Sometimes passed on in quiet ceremony. Taste also meant story. A certain stew might carry the memory of a stormy night. A smoky flavor might remind someone of a cousin's wedding. A honey-sweet barley cake might only appear during midwinter. Flavor became calendar, emotion, and lineage. Children learned the rhythm by helping. Stirring pots, washing roots, turning meat. Their fingers learned by watching, by spilling, by tasting too early. The mouth became memory. The stomach learned season. Food taught patience as much as pleasure. And of course, feasts marked everything. A good hunt, a birth, a first snow, not always with grand portions, but with special preparation. A pinch of spice saved all year. A bone polished for stew day. A bit of honey drizzled on ash bread. The meal said what words couldn't. That someone mattered. That something was changing. That togetherness deserved marking. Now rest into your own rhythm. Think of your last warm meal. The scent of steam. The curve of your bowl. Let it carry you not just into sleep, but into memory shared by countless generations who once stirred pots in the dark and waited for flavor to tell them they belong. Chapter 14. Homes of Earth and Hearthen, the Iron Age. A home did not begin with walls or roof. It began with ground. It began with the slope of a hill, the bend of a stream, the comfort of a windbreak. To build a shelter was to read the land, to ask it where warmth would linger and where water might seep. A home was never just a structure. It was a way of listening to the world. Most homes were round. Circles held heat. Circles made voices travel gently. A central hearth meant warmth spread evenly. Smoke climbed calmly through thatch or vent, and people could gather without corner. These round houses stood in groups, packed with woven wattles daubed in clay, topped with conical roofs made from straw, heather, or reeds. From outside they looked simple. From within they pulsed with quiet life. The floor was earth, but never bare. Layers of reeds, bark, leather, and woven mats softened steps. In winter, animal skins were stretched edge to edge. Each skin had a story, of the hunt of the tanner, of the season it came from. To walk on that floor was to walk on memory. The walls told stories too. Children scratched marks into clay. Sometimes elders drew patterns or animal outlines with fingers dipped in pigment. The daub cracked in frost, but was patched with care. These weren't perfect walls. They breathed. These weren't perfect walls. They shifted slightly in wind, but they held. Inside, a rhythm ruled the space. The hearth in the center glowed day and night. Around it, life circled. To one side, tools rested. Baskets, grinding stones, antler picks. To another, food sat in bowls or hung from beams. Sleeping mats curled against the curve of the wall. Everyone knew where to reach in the dark. Every item had a voice. Smoke drifted upward, staining beams and leaving stories in soot. The scent of char, stew, and old wool wrapped itself around every beam. On cold days, smoke clung low and people sat quietly waiting. On warm days, breezes stirred roof thatch and cleared the air. But always the smell of lived warmth lingered. Homes were rarely silent. There was hum of breath, of fire, of quiet work. A mother humming as she wove. A father sharpening blade on stone. Children whispering stories while poking embers. Dogs snored. Chickens clucked outside. The roof creaked as it dried after rain. Silence was a tapestry of sound. Privacy as we think of it didn't exist. Life was shared. Even sleep was close. People nested near warmth. Sometimes an elder wrapped in fur snored softly while a child nearby stirred soup. A cough in the night might wake others, not with alarm, but with familiarity. These were the sounds of being known. Light came from flame. Candles of tallow or rush dipped in fat. Torches for short tasks. But mostly, people learned to live by low light. Eyes adjusted. Firelight shaped mood. Shadows played across beams and faces. Stories were told with gesture, not expression. Flame taught patience. And in the quiet corners, little things mattered. A carved spoon tucked into rafters. A child's handprint pressed in wet clay near the door. A small braid of straw left to honor the changing season. These gestures weren't grand, but they were felt. They made a house into a home. So now, in your own room, feel the echo of that circular warmth. The walls that once breathed beside earth, floor and hearth still whisper through our instincts. That rhythm of home, the hush, the hum, the fire remains. Chapter 15. Textiles, thread, and the language of hands long before printed cloth or factory seams. The people of the Iron Age clothed themselves in the patience of fingers. Every thread was a gesture. Every garment was a memory looped through time. In villages and homesteads across plains, hills, and valleys, cloth came not from stores but from story. Of sheep of flax, of wind-dried wool and fire-warmed hands. Wool was common. Sheep were not raised just for meat. Their fleece was gathered with care, sometimes plucked by hand before full shearing tools emerged. In some places, wool was carded with combs made from bone or antler, teeth worn smooth by repetition. The fibers were sorted, detangled, and readied. It was a soft process. It took time. That was the point. Then came the spindle, a small weighted tool, often carved with simple symbols. It spun slowly between thumb and forefinger, twisting wool into thread. The rhythm was almost musical. Flick, spin, gather. Fingers learned to feel tension and twist. Some threads needed firmness, others looseness. A woman might spin while walking. A child might mimic the motion with sticks. The sound of the spindle was a quiet heartbeat of daily life. Flax was another source, tougher and requiring more steps. Pulled from soil, soaked in water, then beaten and scraped to release its long, fibrous strands. Flax smelled sharp, earthy. Spinning it was a different skill, learned by repetition and observation. The thread it produced was stronger, smoother, ideal for summer garments or delicate ties. Once thread was spun, it became yarn, and then fabric. Weaving took place on simple looms, upright in some regions, ground-based in others. The warp threads hung tense. The weft danced between them, left and right, line by line. A shuttle passed from one hand to the next. With each row woven, a surface emerged, sometimes rough, sometimes patterned, often imperfect, but always human. Colors came from plants and minerals. Dyed cloth bore the fingerprint of the landscape, greens from nettles or lichen, reds from madder root, blues from woad. Though rarely deep and stable, the dyes were prepared in pots, heated over fire, and soaked into thread slowly. Sometimes, a piece of fabric held multiple dyes layered over time. Each hue was a chemical memory, and textiles weren't just for clothing. Woven bands became belts, ties, bindings. Coarse cloths covered baskets or wrapped tools. Fine weaves served as offerings, tokens of alliance or mourning. Fabric carried more than warmth. It carried meaning. In colder months, people layered thick wool cloaks, sometimes fastened with bronze pins or bone toggles. These cloaks absorbed smoke, repelled water, and softened with age. Some had borders stitched with spirals or geometric lines. Others bore signs of repair, patches sewn neatly with contrasting thread. A well-mended cloak was a source of pride. Children often wore simple shifts tied at shoulder. Babies were wrapped snug in wool swaddles. Even animals might be clothed. thin-skinned goats or injured dogs tucked in scraps. Clothes were not just protection. They were expressions of care. Within each home there was usually one who excelled at mending, a mother, a grandmother, an elder with failing eyes but perfect hands. They held garments up to light, whispered to the threads, and stitched life back into cloth. Every needle pass was a word, every patch a sentence. This was a language not written but worn. And when garments were too torn to repair, they were not discarded. Pieces became wraps, rags, lining for shoes or bags. The final threads might be burned as offering or tucked into thatch for good fortune. Cloth had afterlives. Even when its usefulness ended, its story continued. So rest now in the warmth of imagined wool, the tug of thread between fingers, the hush of cloth folded by firelight. The Iron Age did not shout its fashion. It wore its beauty quietly, in stitches, in spindle hum, in the drape of a worn cloak passed down across seasons. Chapter 16. From Seed to Loaf. Iron Age grains and hearthside bread, the early light of dawn, before the first animal stirred or child awoke. Someone knelt by the fire and brushed away the cooled ash. Near every hearth, the scent of grain and smoke mingled. Bread, in its many forms, was the soft, warm center of Iron Age survival. It was not just food. It was routine, ritual, and reassurance. The grains were hardy. Barley and emmer wheat thrived even in poor soil. In wetter lands, rye and oats were gathered too. Harvest time meant days of bending backs and sore palms. Iron sickles sliced through stalks that rustled in the breeze, and the bundles were tied by cord or twisted straw. Children ran between rows, laughing, scattering husks. Back at home, grains were dried, often in baskets beside fire or in the sun on wide stones. Then came the long grind. The saddle quern, a curved stone tool, was used to crush grain into flour. One stone rested on the ground. Another, held by both hands, rocked back and forth. It was hard work. Dust clung to skin. The sound echoed through the settlement like a heartbeat of effort. A family might spend hours grinding enough flour for a single meal. Flour wasn't pure. Tiny stones crept in. The texture was rough, coarse, and dry. Teeth wore down from years of eating such meals. But the bread it made was rich with the taste of effort and earth. No two batches were the same. Dough was mixed in clay bowls or wooden troughs. Sometimes just water and flour. Sometimes a pinch of salt or dried herbs. Occasionally, a handful of berries or crushed seeds. Leavening was rare. Most bread was flat, round, thick discs cooked directly on hot stones or clay slabs beside the fire. Some were placed under coals, flipped when the top firmed. Others baked in small ovens built from packed mud and stone, their insides glowing with ember heat. The smell was familiar, comforting, even when everything else changed. The season, the weather, the herd's path. Bread returned each day, warm, dense, filling. A piece of bread dipped in broth was a feast. A crust wrapped in hide was travel food. Stale bread soaked in water was breakfast. Nothing was wasted. People ate together, seated on mats or logs, sharing from central bowls. Sharing from central bowls, the youngest got soft bits. The elders chewed the crust. Sometimes a loaf was marked with a cut, an offering to spirit or fortune before it was broken. One loaf might be placed on a grave, another tucked into a traveling pouch. Bread was a companion. Grinding flour wasn't always a chore. Women and girls chatted as they worked, sang short melodies that matched the rhythm of the stone. Children played nearby, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching. Bits of dough stuck to their fingers. They learned early that bread did not come from nowhere. It came from hands, from ash, from time. In harsh seasons, when grain stores thinned, bread became thin too. Mixed with acorn meal, crushed fern root, or even ground bark. These breads were bitter, but they fed. People chewed slowly, stared into fire, and spoke little. Even in those quiet months, the act of baking held the group together. Tools mattered. A carved wooden bowl passed from mother to daughter. A flat baking stone handed down through generations. A worn sack used only for grain. These held history. They smelled of flour, of smoke, of the meals that came before. Losing one could feel like losing a memory, so when night deepened and the last coals glowed, the bread lay cooling on its cloth. Someone sliced it gently. Someone else reached for a pinch of salt. There was no hurry, just warmth, just bread, just a memory of hands that worked to turn soil into sustenance. Now rest near that hearth. Feel the slow weight of bread in palm, the heat of fire across your cheek, the smell of ash and grain in the still night. In each crust there was care. In each meal, a story. The Iron Age was fed by soil, flame, and the soft rise of flour into food. Chapter 17. Textiles and Time. Weaving warmth in the Iron Age when fields grew quiet after harvest, and the animals huddled near shelter. People turned inward, inside huts and roundhouses, past the hearth, and under reed-thatched roofs. Hands moved steadily over spindle and loom. Before cloth there was fiber, and before thread there was patience. In the Iron Age, warmth came not only from fire but from wool and woven skill. Sheep were not only meat and hide, their wool was prized, coarse at times, oily with lanolin, but perfect for spinning. After shearing, tufts of fleece were washed in cold streams, dried on rocks, then teased apart. A comb or fingers separated clumps into fluff. The smell of wool lingered. Earthy, sharp, with traces of field and fire. Spindles were simple, a stick, a weight, a steady hand. Women and girls spun as they walked, as they sat. Even as they watched children play, the drop spindle turned and turned, adding twist to fiber, shaping thread from puff. It was slow work. The hum of spindle and the flick of fingers filled long evenings. Some spinners sang, others whispered. All carried the rhythm of fiber pulling tight. Once thread was spun, it was dyed or stored. Dyes came from plants, bark, roots, and lichen. Soft yellows from weld, deep reds from madder root, purples from berries, browns from oak bark soaked in water. The process smelled of steeped leaves, sour ferment, and wood smoke. A dyed thread was not only colored, it was coated with season, place, and effort. Weaving took shape on upright looms built from wood or pegged into earth. Threads stretched vertically. These were the warp. The weaver passed a shuttle back and forth with the weft, knotting rows tight with a comb or bone beater. The first rows were stiff. Then came rhythm. Over hours and days, the cloth grew. Each pattern spoke of maker. Some kept it simple. Others wove zigzags, waves, or lines that mirrored hills and water paths. Children learned early. A toddler played near loom stones. A child helped wind thread or fetch more wool. By 10, a girl might spin smooth thread. By 12, she might weave for trade. Weaving wasn't women's work. It was survival work, household work, skill passed hand to hand. And cloth meant more than warmth. It meant storage, shelter, identity. A dyed cloak marked a traveler. A band of striped wool wrapped around head or chest signaled kinship or age. Woven bags held grain. Wool cords tied bundles. Even the dead were wrapped in woven pieces, their last warmth from hand-spun thread. Not all cloth was wool. In warmer places, flax was grown and retted. Soaked in stream, dried in sun, beaten and combed until thread could be pulled. Linen was lighter, smoother. It was harder to make but prized in some valleys. It rustled where wool muffled. Some wore both, layers that told of season, trade, and labor. On stormy days, with wind battering the roof and smoke curling low, a family might gather near loom and hearth. A father sharpened tools. A mother wove. A child carded wool. Another played with spindle. These were not idle moments. They were slow work, careful work, work that wrapped bodies in warmth and stories in thread. Patterns held memory. One stripe might mark a season of good lambing. A broken row might remember a flood. A twist in thread might tell of sickness or a child's first steps. Every woven piece was quiet witness. So now rest near the loom. Let the rhythm of thread pulling through fingers ease your mind. Feel the warmth of cloth, not just on skin, but in memory. The Iron Age spun not only wool but time, and every spindle's hum still echoes in our need for warmth, for pattern, for the comfort of something made by hand. Chapter 18. Trading Paths and Memory Routes. The Iron Age on the move as the seasons turned, and harvests filled clay-lined pits. The world beyond the village beckoned. People didn't stay still. They walked. They traded. They visited neighbors and kin. They followed old trails across hills and forests, along rivers and coastlines, wearing paths into the earth with patient steps and heavy bundles. The Iron Age was never isolated. It was stitched together by feet, memory, and exchange. Some of these paths were ancient. They followed the same ridgelines the herds walked, the same valleys shaped by glacial retreat. People knew them not by map, but by body. A hill curve told how long till water. A bent tree marked where a cousin lived. A patch of white stone signaled shelter near dusk. Travelers learned with their senses. The roots lived inside them. Markets weren't always big. Sometimes a trade happened at the edge of a field. Two women met, one with woven bags of barley, the other with smooth jet beads carved from coastal stone. They sat, shared broth, then exchanged goods. No coin changed hands, just nods, smiles, stories. Trust moved alongside the goods. Other trades were more formal. Villages near rivers or crossroads hosted regular gatherings. Simple affairs, part market, part feast. Potters laid out jars. Smiths showed blades. Wool traders unrolled cloth. Hunters brought skins. Families came with what they had and left with what they needed. It was loud, muddy, full of smells and chatter. Children ran between stalls. Dogs barked. Smoke curled from fires where broth simmered and meat turned on spits. Trade brought more than goods. It brought news. A traveler might carry word of a failed harvest, or a new kind of dye root found near distant streams. Songs and jokes moved with the people. So did small inventions. Someone brought a better spindle, a smoother comb, a tighter clasp for brooches. Knowledge drifted slowly but surely along these memory routes. Some traders were known for their range. A man might carry salt from the marshlands to the uplands each year. A woman might bring rare shells from the coast to inland settlements where they held ritual value. These travelers remembered not just routes, but people. They knew which families had new lambs, who had buried an elder, which children were ready for trade apprenticeship. Their memory was as important as their cargo. And paths had meaning beyond use. Some were only walked in certain seasons. Others were lined with small markers, a carved post, a pile of shaped stones, a tree banded with pigment. These weren't borders so much as memories made visible. When someone passed such a marker, they nodded. It meant respect. It meant remembering who walked before. At night, travelers slept near familiar trees or in small shelters dug into banks. Fires were modest. A stew might simmer in a clay pot carried in cloth. They listened to owls and wind, sometimes sang quietly, sometimes whispered to the dark. They did not feel alone. The road held them. The memory of others walking it held them. Sometimes groups traveled together. A family with cloth to sell joined another with flint and another with mead. They shared burdens, told stories, watched for weather. In cold times, they huddled close. In good times, they laughed. It became a kind of rolling village, temporary, flickering, tied together by road and reason. Children learned to walk early, first to the river, then to the edge of the field, then, maybe at 12 or 14, to the nearby village with their older cousin. They watched trade. They carried baskets. They learned to greet, to offer, to receive. These trips were tests and teachings. The road raised them. In time, some routes became formal. Not paved, but worn. Cart tracks deepened. Way stations formed. Elders told of places to avoid after rain, or slopes too steep for burdened goats. These became shared knowledge, passed hand to hand, spoken, never written. Now rest in that quiet path. Feel the hum of feet on packed earth, the rhythm of trade woven into the hills. Let your breath match the slow pace of walking. the murmured exchange of goods and memory. The Iron Age did not stand still. It moved, and in that movement, it remembered itself.